Good evening. Before I begin my opening remarks, I want to thank you all for coming to tonight's event and to let you know that there will be a reception right after our distinguished speaker's presentation and what I'm sure will be a thought-provoking question and answer session. I want to also acknowledge a number of individuals in the audience who have been key supporters of the Tucker Center. And when I call out your name, I would like you to just stand just briefly, and please everybody hold their applause until the end. I know it's hard for Minnesotans to, be recognized publicly, but we can do this. Or you all can do this, I should say. The first person I would like to acknowledge is the Dean of the College of Education and Human Development, Jean Quam. If you could please stand, hold your applause. Jean, by the way, has done quite a bit of research in the area of women and aging. And Dean Quam is accompanied tonight by 24 college alums and special guests, along with 3 staff members from the Dean's office, Richard Burbach, Lynn Slifer, and Mary Tretton. So I want to welcome them all for the great supporters they have been. From the President's office, Lynn Holleran and Patty Franklin. From Phil Eston, who is the new CEO of the University of Minnesota Alumni Association. I should also point out that Phil is a former PhD student of mine, and it's always nice to see when a former student is gainfully employed. And in Phil's case, actually, he's significantly more gainfully employed than his former advisor. Regina Sullivan and Leo Lewis from the Department of Intercollegiate Athletics. I know the two of you are here somewhere. There you go. And our women's basketball coach, who I knew in 1988 when she was a graduate student, Pam Borton. Where's old Pam Borton? Okay. How about a round of applause for our distinguished guests? Pam is also gainfully employed. A very special thanks, obviously, to Van Mueller and the whole Mueller family, whose loyalty and commitment to the Tucker Center and the work we have done is going on 15 years. Finally, I want to acknowledge members of the Tucker team for all the hard work that they have done behind the scenes: Austin Calhoun, Alyssa Norris, and Jonathan Sweet. And a special thanks goes out to Associate Director Dr. Nicole Lavoie, who has overseen this entire event, which is no small task. How about a round of applause for the Tucker team? The world's population is rapidly aging. By 2030, the number of U.S. citizens over 65 will be nearly twice what it is today, and the large majority will be female. This gender difference has significant implications for women's health, well-being, and quality of life. For example, scholars, educators, and policymakers argue that older women are disproportionately affected by ageism, and that cultural factors pressure many aging women to focus more, as our guest speaker tonight has pointed out, on appearance versus physical health, more on facelifting than weightlifting. Tucker Center co-director, Professor Maureen Weiss, makes the point that one of the key barriers to aging successfully is the issue of self-perception. According to Dr. Weiss, many older women do not self-identify as physically active. This is unfortunate because such self-perceptions are associated with sedentary and insufficient physical activity, even though older women are keenly aware that being active means being healthy. Here is one quote that, for me, sums up the critical relationship between successful aging and being physically active. From Jack Kirk, an individual who ran marathons well into his 90s and who once said, "You don't stop running because you get old because you stop running." Into this discussion and analysis comes our distinguished speaker, Mariah Burton Nelson. In tonight's presentation, she will explore the intersections of gender, physical activity, and aging. And as is her custom for those of us who know her, she will challenge us about how we think about aging in general, as well as our own aging process. She will focus in particular on how physical activity can improve one's quality of life and help ensure graceful and successful aging. Mariah Burton Nelson is best known as the author of 6 books, including The Stronger Women Get, The More Men Love Football, which she discussed as part of our distinguished lecture series back when she was much younger in 1996. An internationally recognized authority on gender in sports, in her much, much younger days, she was a standout basketball player at Stanford University. A former hospice volunteer and director of the speechwriting team at AARP, Nelson joined the Gray Panthers while still in her 20s, indicative of her lifelong interest in and commitment to women and aging. She currently serves as the executive director of the American Association for Physical Activity and Recreation, an organization which promotes fun and fitness for all, for life. In 2007, she was named one of the 100 most influential sports educators in America by the International Institute for Sport. Here is a short video that gives us even more background on Mariah Burton Nelson.
Mariah Burton Nelson has always been an athlete. She believes that we are all athletes, all strong, all brave, all free to move and play as we please. Like a lot of children, Mariah loved swimming. She also loved competing. She loved the intensity of it, the effort, the challenge, the excitement you feel when you say, yes, let's race. Let's see how well we can do. At Stanford, Mariah was the leading scorer and rebounder, averaging 19 points per game. One rebounding record remained unbroken for 24 years. Mariah played basketball for Stanford and for professional teams in France and the United States. Now a national expert on sports and success, she has written for the New York Times, the Washington Post, USA Today, Newsweek, and many other publications. Her 5 books include We Are All Athletes, and one with an award-winning title, The Stronger Women Get, the More Men Love Football. She appears on Today, Good Morning America, Dateline, Nightline, Primetime Live, and many other programs, and gives about 50 keynote speeches each year to corporate, association, government, and college audiences. She shows people how to bring athletic courage, confidence, and commitment into their everyday lives, how to walk and talk and lead and achieve as athletes do. Through her sports experiences, Mariah developed a gratifying sense of physical competence and confidence. When you become an athlete, you begin to feel strong and graceful. You begin to love your body for what it can do and how good it can feel. When you're rowing or racing or fully engaged in any athletic activity, you don't obsess over whether your tummy is poking out. You don't succumb to social pressures to act dainty or delicate or decorative or deferential. Author Tom Spanbauer writes, "We are who we are because of the stories we tell ourselves about ourselves." If you tell yourself an "I am a klutz" story, for instance, you'll keep bumping into things. But tell yourself an "I am an athlete" story, and it will affect everything. Your posture, your pride, your sense of power and possibility.
So, did you all notice that that video wasn't just about a history of Mariah's career, but about her hairdos throughout the decades? Did you notice that? Please join me in giving a warm Minnesota welcome to one of my very favorite aging women, Mariah Burton Nelson.
Me about 20 years ago, she said, "Do you know Mary Jo Cain?" And I said, "No, the name doesn't ring a bell." And she said, "You need to meet Mary Jo Cain. I think you two are going to be really good friends." And indeed, she was right, and we are. And thank you for such a nice introduction. So yes, I am aging. Is anybody else here aging? Okay, good. I was on the plane from Washington yesterday, from Washington, D.C., and I know at least one other person is from Washington, D.C. Is that you? Nice to meet you. Anybody else here from Washington? It's a cool place to live, especially with the cherry blossoms right now. The plane was full of Boston marathoners who were coming home to Minnesota. It was really cool. I was proud of Minnesota for having all these fit, young and old women and men wearing their proud T-shirts from the Boston Marathon. I started chatting with a few of them and learning more about their experience running the Boston Marathon. And one of them, after a while, turned to me and asked me, well, who are you? And I had this speech in mind, so I said, well, I'm an aging American. And the group of them looked at me and they kind of frowned, and one of them said, like Chinese or Japanese or what? I said, aging American. So, well, how many of you wore your sneakers today? Good. Okay, I wrote in the Tucker Center newsletter, and I know not everybody had a chance to read it, but I told you that I was going to wear my sneakers, and I invited you to wear sneakers or comfortable shoes as well. Sneakers to me are very symbolic of fun and freedom and physical activity. Does anybody else like wearing sneakers? How about some of you sneaker people? What else do they represent to you? Comfort. Yeah. And why not be comfortable? I think all of those things, comfort and fun and freedom and physical activity, become even more important as we age. And I'll be talking about that, how important physical activity is as we age. I also think that aging gives us an opportunity to become more and more authentic. And this is who I am. And I'm an athlete. I like to wear sneakers. So I decided to wear sneakers today to embody that message. I have a friend who is turning 60 soon, and she said, I'm really looking forward to turning 60. And you don't hear that much. So I said, well, why? And she said, I feel like I'm becoming more and more myself. And I thought, well, that's cool. That's cool. And that is an opportunity we have. We don't all do that necessarily. But it's an opportunity we have as we get to know ourselves better over time to become more and more ourselves. So I don't know if you can see my sneakers back there, but I want to show them to you. So here's one. You want to see the other one? Okay, one's enough. Well, we're here to talk about aging. Are women aging successfully? And I want you to ask that about yourselves, about your own lives. And I'm glad to see several men in the audience as well. And I think most of what I have to say today will be relevant to you as well, you men. And if not, you might think about the women in your life and how it might apply to their lives. So, I wanted to mention, as you did, Mary Jo, that I was here before in 1996 talking about the stronger women get, the more men love football, and then again in 2002. So this is kind of my hat trick. And I'm delighted to be participating in the Tucker Center for Research on Girls and Women in Sport, and so impressed with their staff that has been so helpful to me today. So could we give them another round of applause, please? So back in 96, as I said, my talk was the stronger women get, the more men love football. And I was thinking that today, the talk could be considered the stronger women get, the more fun we'll have in old age, since strength, physical strength, becomes increasingly important as we age. This is my mother, Sara Nelson. Here she is 70 years old and competing in a national masters swimming meet. She placed as high as 6th in one of the events in Masters Nationals, and this was the first time she had competed at the national level. My mother's a psychiatrist and a very accomplished professional, but some of you who have read my books or heard me speak before know of her from my stories, because I've told many of you about how, like many women of her generation, she was born in 1924, so she's 85 now. Like many women of her generation, she did not have early athletic opportunities, and she was very athletic, quite a swimmer, and always wanted to compete. So she had to create her own competitors. So she had children. And her first child was a lovely daughter, and my mother was very happy with my sister Carol, but Carol was not athletic, so she didn't really fulfill this lifelong desire of my mother's to compete. So Mom had to keep having kids. So she had her second child, Peter, and he's a cool guy too, but he had ear problems that kept him out of the pool, and that's really my mother's favorite sport. So I got to be born, so that was cool. I got to be born, and then Mom could stop having kids because I was perfectly happy to race against Mom in the pool. And our first race took place when I was 5 years old. She was 37. And she had waited for this her whole life. She was really, really psyched. So she got there early at our neighbor's pool to swim our one lap, and we both leaned over like this, and I had my little tutu on with those bathing suits little girls used to wear with a little skirt on them. Although in retrospect, I realized why she got the skirt. Slow me down, exactly, because she wanted to win, So I had my little skirt on, she had more of a tank suit on. So we dove in, swam as fast as we could to the other end. And when I got there, I could tell that she had been there for a while, but just to be sure I knew it, she said, "Ha, beat you." Now this would annoy some children, but it didn't to me because I had just swum the fastest race of my life, and I looked over at my mom, and she was beaming and happy, and I was playing with her. And I understood immediately and intuitively what competition is, which is an opportunity to share a passion with someone else who, like you, wants to excel. It's an opportunity to get to know them and appreciate them and get to know their strengths as well as your own. So Mom and I have been lifelong competitors. I challenged her again the year I was 6 because I could tell she was having a little more fun than I was. And I lost when I was 6. She won again, and she won when I was 7 and 8 and 9. And finally, by the year I was 10, I beat my mom. But she still disputes this, maintaining I was 11 by the time I finally beat her. But in this picture, you can see that she is finally, after many, many years of my encouraging her to race against people her own age, she finally took me up on it, but she didn't actually compete until she turned 70. She joined a team at age 69. But if you understand masters competitions, you know that you compete in 5-year age increments. So she didn't want to race against those fast 65 to 69-year-olds. She waited until she turned 70, and then she did very well in those meets. So you'll see Mom through a lot of these slides. I used her kind of like the Travelocity gnome, on those Travelocity commercials, that roaming gnome. And you're going to think I put her in all these different positions, but actually that's just who she is. She's very active. So you'll see her representing, to me, she does represent successful aging because she's very active, she's very enthusiastic, and she's willing to dive into unfamiliar waters, which is what it takes, I think. One of the things it takes to age successfully is to be willing to change and to grow. So that's Mom. Of course, 85 is not 25, so she's not as strong or flexible as fast as she used to be. And I think this is one of the bummers about aging. I'm going to talk about how wonderful it is, but I also want to acknowledge that many of us are afraid of it and resistant to it because we associate it with decline. And some of that is true. There will be physical declines if you have been athletic at a younger age. And then ultimately, of course, this is why aging is such a bummer, because that is where it ends up. It's where we all end up. And yet, if we are aware of death, as Mary Jo mentioned, I did work at hospice at a young age, as well as joining the Gray Panthers. And when you work with hospice or when you have loved ones pass away, you begin to appreciate life, I think, even more. So I think having, Carlos Castaneda used to talk about having death right over your left shoulder, and it's not a bad thing to remember that life is limited. And so we ought to appreciate it every moment we can. I am not an expert on aging, and I know that Jean and some other people here are. I just happen to have a lifelong interest in it, so I look forward to hearing what some of the experts have to say afterward. I think part of why I've been interested in aging is because I had a lot of old women in my life when I was young. This is Aunt Ollie. She died when I was just 5 years old, but she lived with us, and she had a big influence on me. I also had a grandmother Burton, and a grandmother Nelson, and I had an Aunt Annemie and an Aunt Minnie. So I was kind of surrounded by all these old women who were affectionate and kind and really cared about me as a child. And I'd just like to take a minute to ask you to reflect on the Aunt Ollie in your life, if you were fortunate enough to have one. I'm seeing some people nod. You want to just maybe call out some of the names of the people who, male or female, who were old when you were young and helped you appreciate, them and your own life or your own family? Any names? Thank you. Some more? Ida. Grandma. Right. Yeah, and someday, if you are affectionate and caring with young people, some of whom haven't even been born yet, They too will be remembering you long after you're gone, and you will influence how they think about aging and older people. So we're here to redefine aging. I have more of an expertise, as Mary Jo mentioned, in women in sports, and I have been really engaged in the process of redefining athlete, and even to some extent redefining woman. And now I'm interested in redefining aging, but it's not something that I can do by myself. I would like to do it collectively, and I would like to ask you to think about that today with me. In Mo Weiss's Tucker Center newsletter article, she wrote about having asked her students to describe older adults. Some of the adjectives they used will not surprise you: declining health, frail, sick, remorseful, abandoned, dependent. But I want to ask, is that what you project for your own future? Is that what you expect to happen in the future? And if not, what can we do about that? You might relate to this phrase by a psychologist named Sarah Perlman. The phrase is midlife astonishment. So if you're young, you won't get this yet, but she defines midlife astonishment as a developmental crisis marked by a sudden awareness of the acceleration and stigmatization of aging, and characterized by feelings of amazement and despair at the convergence of diminished physical and sexual attractiveness and the multiple losses associated with age. It can initiate a disruption of one's identity and result in feelings of heightened vulnerability, shame, and loss of self-esteem. I would think that it's probably fair to assume that midlife astonishment precedes most facelifts. So are you aging successfully? And what would that mean to you? I'd like to ask you to think about that for a moment, especially as it pertains to physical activity and body image. Are you aging successfully? And we are all aging. If you are young, and I'm glad to see a lot of college students here, you may think of it as just something that grandparents are doing, or maybe you're noticing your parents doing it, but you are too. And we're all doing it at the same rate, pretty much one day at a time, though it can seem to accelerate over time. So it's a process we're all engaged in, and I think it's valuable for all of us to think about it. So do me a favor and take a minute to think about your own aging process and ask yourself this question: what would aging successfully mean to you? And then turn to somebody who is geographically convenient, meaning right next to you, preferably one person, and just take a minute to think about body image and physical changes related to your own aging process, and be as candid as you can. The person will promise not to shout out your responses to me afterward, all right? And then I'll raise my hand when I'm ready to bring us back together. Go ahead and have a little conversation about your own aging process. All right, let's come back together. Thank you. Okay, so you have begun a conversation. You've begun a conversation with somebody you may or may not know, and you may or may not continue the conversation with that person, but I encourage you to continue that conversation, to reflect on your own aging process and to begin to define aging successfully for yourself. As I said, I'm beginning to take this on as an identity myself. I didn't think of myself as aging when I was 20 or 21 either. But now I am a proud member of AARP. And I don't think of myself as young at heart or young in spirit. I'm not trying to look young or be young or act young. I am embracing my aging process and defining it in a positive way. I do notice, too, that when I was young, I made a lot of foolish mistakes. I made a lot of inconsiderate remarks. And I experimented with drugs that could have killed me. So not to stereotype youth or anything, but ideally we learn a bit over time and mature. And I do think that every age has its advantages. Oh, whoops. Well, there's Mom again. She popped up. Yeah, and this is, of course, the answer to how to age successfully is move. It's one answer. Stay involved, stay active, and move. And then I have Mom again saying every age has its advantages. In Japan, there's a concept that some of you may have heard of called wabi-sabi. And this is about imperfection and finding the beauty in imperfection. They say that nothing is finished, nothing lasts, and nothing is perfect. And that's integrated into their concept of beauty, which is very different from how Americans tend to think about aging or beauty. We say to people, gosh, you don't look 50, you don't look 60, and that's supposed to be a compliment. Whereas, if you say to a woman, gee, you're one of the guys. I think of you as one of the guys. I don't really think of you as a woman. Most of us do not take that as a compliment. And if you say to an African-American person, gosh, you don't look black, usually they're not thinking that that's a big compliment, and yet you don't look old, you look young, is what we often say to each other, especially women, to compliment each other. And what does that mean? My mom has a lot of young friends, young to her, compared to her at 85. So they may be in their 60s or so, and they complain sometimes about their wrinkles. And she says it makes her feel bad, to be sitting around having lunch with people who are saying, oh, I don't want to get wrinkles. Wrinkles are so ugly. At 85, like most people who are 85, Mom has a fair number of wrinkles. But it hurts her feelings, and her friends are kind. They've been her friends for years. I adore them. But they are insensitive through not having had their consciousness raised. So I want to ask you to raise your consciousness, to think about the way you talk about aging and how that may influence the people around you. And even old people really can't agree on a term for getting old. AARP has found out in surveys. They don't like senior or elderly or older. Women in particular are not crazy about old bags, old hags, old biddies, old birds, old fangled, old fashioned, old and decrepit, over the hill, blue hairs, golden oldies, vulnerable, frail, declining, dowdy, doddering, not getting any younger, and responsible for a mountain of debt that will become an intolerable burden on society. So no wonder AARP came up with the phrase, people over 50. But maybe we can't agree on a terminology because we don't want to be defined by our age. And I understand that. To be defined can be limiting. So we don't want to be limited by this. But at the same time, civil rights leaders, from Martin Luther King to Ellen DeGeneres, have urged us to reclaim language that has been used against us. So we adopted black and lesbian and gay over time, words that used to sound really hurtful. So we embraced these words, and I'd like to ask us to embrace old. I loved it when I saw that the Center on Aging here at the University of Minnesota has a newsletter called Old News. It's just hilarious. It's just so great. So congratulations, for claiming the word old and using it with humor. In fact, I think I'd like to start a march on the Washington Mall in Washington, D.C., with a bunch of people who want to claim the word old, and we would have a chant, and it would say, we're old, we're bold, we're always too hot or too cold. Isn't that true? All right, so let's do a little experiment, and this is going to might make some of you a little uncomfortable. All right, so are you willing to do an experiment that might make you uncomfortable? Okay, thank you. That's great. All right, so if you're over 50, please stand up. If you're able to stand up. All right, and if you're over 60, please stay standing. Okay, and if you're over 70, would you stay standing? All right, and could we give these people a round of applause, acknowledging our elders? Thank you. How did that feel? Good, hard, got a lot of applause. Yeah, and we don't usually do that in our society. We don't usually applaud people for having lived a long time successfully. And I would like to encourage you to do that, to respect your elders. There are some cultures that do that. I've heard, like Pluto or something. I mean, it's pretty far-fetched, pretty far afield from general American culture to respect our elders. And I also asked you to acknowledge how old you are. And a lot of us don't. And isn't that a weird thing? I mean, can you imagine being a Martian and coming down and talking to somebody in America and saying, how old are you? And she says, I don't want to tell you. And the Martian would say, well, why not? And she would say, well, I'm kind of embarrassed about it. And the Martian would say, well, is it your fault? I mean, isn't everybody getting older? Are you responsible for this? Is there anything you can do about it? And then I think the Martian would just say, what the heck is going on here? And yet we do that. We're afraid to mention how old we are, and sometimes it's because we will be discriminated against. But I think, too, like other forms of discrimination, we internalize it, and we think, well, there's something wrong with us. I talked to a 93-year-old recently, and she said, boy, once you get over 90, you really lose respect. She said, I can't have a conversation with somebody without them patting me on the head and saying, oh, you're doing so well, dear. And it was a real problem for her, and the real kicker is she lives in a retirement home. So the people who are saying, oh, you're doing so well, dear, are like 88 or something. But we do that. We discriminate. Whose fault is this, that we have this internalized ageism? I like to blame the gerontophobe. Do you know what gerontophobia is? Can you figure it out? Yeah, fear of aging, an irrational fear of getting older or old people or aging. And I like the word more than ageism, though that's a valuable word too, but gerontophobia, the gerontophobe kind of sounds like a dinosaur, exactly. It's like a dinosaur. And it reminds me of dinosaurs in that it's a huge, mythic, scary creature that has power over us. This gerontophobe that tells us there's something wrong with us and there's something wrong with old people. So I'd like to encourage you to think of other words that we could use that would be more positive to begin to define the aging process. I've also heard the word grand boomers, which is kind of fun for boomers who have grandchildren, and boomeritis, which is the injuries you get when you forget that you're not as young as you used to be and try and do the things that you did when you were 20. So since this is a distinguished lecture, and I promised Mary Jo I would be as distinguished as possible under the circumstances, sort of under the sneaker circumstances, I will get to some research and talk with you about how to age successfully according to the research I have done. But here basically is the answer. So, any questions? Okay, I'll go into a little more detail. All right, specifically, exercise is more important for women than for men, in a sense, because women are less likely to have time for exercise. So they need more social support, more opportunities, more encouragement to exercise because they tend to be busy caring for kids, grandkids, and their spouse. They tend to care for the spouse until he dies, and then they live for another 5 to 10 years. So women have less time, they have less income. We know that older women have less income, so they're not as readily able to join gyms or invest otherwise in sports equipment. And they're less likely to have the habit of fitness. Like my mother, the people who are old now did not grow up as athletes. They had no early encouragement to be athletic. So they need extra encouragement now. And because women tend to live longer, they will need to support those joints and bones and muscles longer. The World Health Organization names 5 leading causes of illness and death, which are heart disease, obesity, cancer, diabetes, and depression. And can you think of the one thing that can help you postpone or avoid all 5 of those? Exercise. Isn't that amazing? Isn't that amazing? One thing. Now, eventually we will die of something, but one thing can help postpone or avoid all of those things. I also want to note that even people who take very good care of their bodies get sick. So if you are sick, I'm not saying it's because you didn't take good care of your body. Lance Armstrong comes to mind, cancer survivor. Martina Navratilova was recently diagnosed with cancer. I think of Heather Farr, a 28-year-old who died of breast cancer after a successful career in the LPGA. So there are preventive measures you can take, but your genes and accidents and things have their own plans for you. So I'm not in any sense blaming people who do get sick. And then there are some things that improve with age, but I can't remember what they are. Okay, I wrote them down. There's a New York Times science writer named Barbara Strauch who has a new book called The Secret Life of the Grown-Up Brain. And she uses the term grown-up to refer to people between 40 and 65. It's a term that AARP uses quite a bit as well. And she says that social expertise, meaning the ability to judge what people are doing non-verbally or verbally in any social situation, improves with age. And this is not just her opinion, but it's research based on a Seattle longitudinal study of 6,000 people starting in 1956. So they've been tracking these people all these years, the exact same people, and seeing how they change and how they score on tests over time. Social expertise, financial decision-making improves with age. Understanding the gist of an argument improves with age. Vocabulary tends to improve with age, as does verbal memory, believe it or not. Those of you who are middle-aged or older and having memory issues, in general, verbal memory, the ability to remember what you have been told, improves, as does spatial memory. There are some gender differences, interestingly, that men, in terms of these cognitive functions, tend to peak in their 50s, and women tend to peak in their 60s. And women are a little better on verbal and vocabulary. So some things do get better, and exercise, to be more specific than just move. I will read a long list, some of which will be familiar to you, but it's really interesting how long the list is, how comprehensive it is, the ways that exercise is good for our bodies and brains. Exercise reduces the risk of high blood pressure, heart disease, heart failure, and stroke. It improves metabolism and digestion, improves the risk of breast and colon cancer, offsets the pain of arthritis, helps control cholesterol, decreases the chance of developing type 2 diabetes, increases pain tolerance, elevates mood, reducing depression and anxiety. It is the best known treatment for depression, better, according to a Duke University study, than Zoloft for depression. It strengthens bones and muscles, of course, which decreases the risk of osteoporosis and facilitates the activities of daily living for older people, such as walking and carrying things and getting out of chairs, reduces the risk of falling, improves weight loss and maintenance, of course, improves sleep, increases energy, improves sexual function, which is a bonus, improves brain function and cuts the risk of Alzheimer's, which is something many baby boomers are concerned about as we watch our parents suffer from this disease. And beyond all that, our bodies are how we know ourselves and the world. They are proprioceptive organs. And exercise is fun. It feels good. Once you find something you love to do, it feels good. And those of you who are athletes or are regular exercisers, are in the habit of exercising, know this. It's not drudgery. It's not standing on a treadmill waiting for the time to go by. It's really fun. So I want to remind the rest of you of that too. Robert Butler, the gerontologist who started the National Institute on Aging, said that if exercise could be packed into a pill, it would be the single most widely prescribed medicine in the nation. So it's better than any medicine, and there's mom again. However, only 30% of adults exercise at least 3 times a week. Only 30%. And 40% are totally sedentary, basically never exercise. So despite Title IX and the fitness revolution, many women are stiff, sore, out of shape and overweight. Yet the older we get, the more vulnerable we become to heart disease, cancer, stroke, osteoporosis, and injuries from falls. Older women of color suffer more disease and disability, mostly because of a higher incidence of obesity and diabetes and less access to healthy food and medical care. Here's a pretty amazing statistic. Almost 2 million people a year die from physical inactivity. So imagine the conversation with God, just for the heck of it, not like a religious thing, but just imagine however you perceive her to be. You get to heaven, and God says, well, what brings you here? And you say, I sat to death. Isn't that amazing? And yet 2 million people a year are pretty much having that conversation. So we all die from something, but poor physical fitness is a better predictor of premature death than smoking. Isn't that amazing? Physical inactivity is a better predictor of premature death than smoking, according to the New England Journal of Medicine. So the problem, really, is inactivity, not aging. And children need to move too, of course, but exercise is more important as we age. Michelle Obama is encouraging children to get in the habit of moving at an early age, which is, of course, a fantastic initiative. Let's move, so that we continue to exercise throughout our lives. But it does become even more important. You can get away with not exercising much when you are 20, but by the time you're 40, your body will basically start to fall apart if you have not been exercising. The good news is your health is largely under your own control, and the National Physical Activity Guidelines recently released by the federal government only require 30 minutes a day, but they note that for adults, if you exercise 60 minutes a day, there are additional benefits you will gain from that. So here are, and this will be familiar to many of you, the most important aspects of physical activity, and it's ABCF, sort of like grades in school: aerobic, balance, core strength, and flexibility. Some of the research just says strength, but I emphasize core strength because of reading I have done and conversations I've had with health practitioners who note that you can do biceps curls all day, but if you don't have a strong core to support your entire frame, you're going to start having back problems and injuring yourself in other ways. So you've got to start here with the core. And fortunately, there are many ways to strengthen the core besides sit-ups that are pretty interesting and fun. So the best exercise you can do is the kind you love. So find something you love to do and then do that. The most exciting research, I think, has to do with memory and learning and physical activity. You know how you've probably heard, don't drink excessively, you'll kill brain cells, and brain cells don't grow back. I heard that a lot growing up. And it is true that excessive drinking is not a good idea for many reasons, and it does kill brain cells. However, you do grow new brain cells, and how you grow new brain cells is through exercise. The brain is surprisingly like the heart muscle or other muscles, that if you exercise, it actually gets stronger. Let me explain this. Here's a forest. This happens to be a forest in Costa Rica. And let's imagine that this is your brain, and it has 1 billion trees in it. And each tree has 100 leaves. So this is because your brain has about, depending on how much drinking you've been doing, 100 billion cells, neurons or cells. This brain happens to have a bird in it, and I'm not trying to say anything about you being a bird brain. But for the brain to do its job, and some of you know this, because you're scholars and know more about this probably than I do, but it is new research that is really interesting, I think, and exciting for us, those of us who are committed to exercise and to retaining cognition as long as possible. In order for the brain to function, the leaves, in a sense, the neurons need to connect with each other. Remember, there's a synapse, and so they don't actually touch each other to exchange information or communicate. They send little messages across this synapse. But the neurons grow through exercise, so you have more neurons when you exercise more, and you also generate more neurotransmitters, the chemicals that help cross that synapse, the norepinephrine and dopamine and serotonin. So exercise actually has that influence and strengthens the whole system through something that John Rady, in a book called Spark, has called Miracle Grow for the Brain. It's called brain-derived neurotrophic factor. It's a protein, and he says it's like exercise, it's like sprinkling this stuff on the brain and strengthening the infrastructure of the brain so that you can think better. So exercise helps you grow new leaves or neurons. It makes better squirrel-like connections. And by squirrel-like, I picture that when, imagine that neurotransmitters are like little squirrels, and every time a squirrel jumps from one leaf to another leaf, it actually strengthens, it's like it creates a bridge underneath its feet so that other squirrels can more easily make that leap from one neuron to the next. And it overall strengthens the branches. So I just think it's really cool. And what else is cool is that it doesn't only happen in the motor cortex of the brain, it happens in the cerebellum. Oh, excuse me, it happens in the hippocampus, which is here. This is not mom. It's a little hippo to help you remember hippocampus. And it's the significance of these exercise-induced changes happening in this part of the brain is this is the part of the brain that's responsible for memory and for learning new things. So when you exercise, this part that's responsible for memory is strengthened, which is probably why exercise has a protective effect against Alzheimer's. This is the part of the brain that is first attacked by Alzheimer's. So the more you exercise, the more you are strengthening this part. And if you feel like you've been a lifelong exerciser and you still have a bad memory, that's my case, actually, I do. But I just think it would be worse if I hadn't exercised. So many of us are concerned, as I mentioned, about dementia. And here are the 4 best ways to prevent Alzheimer's, besides not having parents who had it, which is a little harder to control. Education, the people who do best when they get Alzheimer's and are least likely to get Alzheimer's are well educated, they're engaged socially and in terms of work. They have self-efficacy, meaning they believe that they can control their environment, and they exercise. And that too, of course, is mom. So in sum, there's a lot of good news I think I have offered to you tonight, and I have tried to be distinguished. And but I've talked about dinosaurs, and I wore my sneakers, and I'm also going to ask you to sing a song. If you will sing that with me, and you have it on your little card. So as you're pulling out your card, I'd also like to ask you to consider coming up to sing with me on stage. Because some of you are certainly singers, or would like to be singers, or are willing to dive into new waters and just try something for the heck of it. So just consider that for a minute while I summarize what I've talked about today. So many of the symptoms that we think of as symptoms of aging are actually symptoms of physical inactivity. High blood pressure, osteoporosis, cognitive decline, all of those can be symptoms of inactivity rather than inherent in aging. If you move, and especially if you move in a playful way, you are more likely to engage your brain and grow new neurons and help the neurons communicate with each other. So if you just do the treadmill thing and plug in your iPod, you're not going to get nearly as powerful of a brain effect as if you, for instance, play the best sport, which is, Laurie, where's Laurie? Basketball, there we go. If you play basketball or any other game requiring strategy or thought or balance, like yoga, so consider that when you're choosing exercise. Try to get your brain involved in the exercise as well as your body. I believe, as you saw in the intro, we are who we are because of the stories we tell ourselves about ourselves. And I encourage you to claim the fact that you are aging, acknowledge your aging process, and redefine aging for yourselves. We haven't come up with a collective definition of it. I think that's evolving, and I would like your help with that. So you have ways to contact me, several ways to contact me on your little handout, and I encourage you to stay in touch with me and tell me your own aging story. One of my books is called We Are All Athletes, and in fact, we are all aging as well. And the two are very related, and I look forward to hearing more from you about that. There's also a poem that I'll close with on your handout, which is, you have been given a body, a gift that will last till the end. Make fitness a habit, a hobby. Your body will be your best friend. Okay, so now is the time for a little chorus of women and men who are willing to take this small public risk to come up and sing my song with me. What do you think? Come on. Yes, stare, here we go. Great, Connie, thank you very much. It's gonna be fun. Good, I see some more people coming. All right, so while these people are coming down, these brave souls, let me just ask you, how many of you think that you are not a very good singer? Okay, so if you feel like you're not a very good singer, just take a minute and turn to the person next to you and just tell them that. Okay, so here's the deal. So now they're not going to be surprised, right? They're not going to be surprised if you don't sing very well. And it really doesn't matter. Okay, so we have our chorus.
You know, Mariah.
Extra
Mariah,
credit, yes.
There has to be at least one or two more men.
All right, we need some more men.
Come
More
on.
brave men.
Oh, okay.
Yes. Okay, and please line up in the front.
Be a leader.
Be a leader.
Basketball player, Mariah.
Cool.
I wasn't very good.
Oh, I'm sure you were good. Okay. All right, we got more men, we got some women. All right, now we have to understand what we're going to do. There is a verse and there's a chorus, and my team here is going to sing the verse, which is the first part. This reads down, so the part that's not in italics, we're going to sing that part, and everybody else is going to sing the part that is in italics, starting with osteoporosis, and then fewer backaches. And this is sung to the tune of My Favorite Things. And so the osteoporosis part, where you all will come in, is something like osteoporosis, deep vein thrombosis, okay? So that's your line, and we will help them too, because we're the experts, right? Oh, Mary Jo, good for you. I didn't know you came up. How cool, how could you not?
This is
How could you not?
a measure of
True friendship, absolutely, yes. All right, and we'll also put the words up here in case somebody wants to read them up there, so you can look at our chorus. Okay, so we're gonna start. And so, like, women who exercise, got the basic gist of it? Right, wait, that was a little preview. Okay, ready? So you guys are just the audience at the moment. You're gearing up for your role. You're going to come in on osteoporosis. Ready, set. Women who exercise build bones and muscles, less risk of stroke and less strain on blood vessels, less diabetes, arthritis, and fat. Physical happiness, how about that? Osteoporosis, deep vein thrombosis, these will feel so bad. But when we get moving, we rarely get sick. More good news, we're rarely sad. You rock, excellent, okay. We are all athletes, I hope you believe it. Fitness is yours, I know you can achieve it. Make it a habit and learn how to train. Your body will love you and so will your brain. Fewer backaches, fewer heartaches, better sleep and sex. Go walking or swimming, invite all your friends. Good health is all yours. Go flex. Fabulous. Thank you so much, all of you. Thank you, thank you.
Talk about sex in front of my students.
Thank you, really cool. Well, did you have fun? Shouldn't aging be fun, if nothing else? Okay, and if you didn't get the memo about the sneakers and you want to wear your sneakers tomorrow, wear them. You know, if you want to wear sneakers every day for the rest of your life, tell them Mariah said it's a good idea. They're comfortable, they're fun, they're free, they encourage physical activity. So I'm ready now for either questions and answers, if I have any answers, or just comments. Yes, sir.
Mariah, I'm intrigued by the basketball as opposed to the treadmill thing, because I'm wondering that whole communal aspect.
Excuse me, we're taping this, and so they want you to have a mic, and there's a mic behind you. Alyssa is going to hand it to you. Would you do me a favor and start over for the sake of the taping?
Sure.
Thanks. They'll have to erase my saying that too, I guess.
I'm intrigued by your comment about basketball and that being better for brain function and development than just getting on the treadmill. I'm also interested in it from a communal aspect because I think part of healthy aging is remaining, and you touched on this as well, socially engaged.
Absolutely.
And I'm wondering if you have any more to say about that, or if other people in the room have a sense of the importance of that communal dimension to physical activity.
Well, I'm glad you brought it up because absolutely it is important. And we tend to, again, as Americans, isolate ourselves and think of our problems as individual problems. But we know that social engagement is good for all sorts of health outcomes. So I don't think I know much more about that, though I have seen research on it over the years. Does anybody else want to comment? Absolutely can add to the fun dimension, yes. And the paying attention part, like in basketball, you have to be careful to pass to people who are open and not run over people and be responding socially all the time. And yet sort of the American fitness industry model is you go to the gym, you don't talk to anybody there, you just plug in, do your thing, and go home. So absolutely, it's better to be socially engaged. And the source of that information, if you want to follow up more about play, there's a wonderful man named Frank Ferencich who has a website called exuberantanimal.com and a whole series of books. And there's also a National Institute for Play, and they have done research that probably incorporates more specifically what you're asking about too, about the social element and how that affects brain health. Yes.
I do have a question. I have two. The one thing that I noticed that my parents are quite old, and one of the things that we see in America is that we pride ourselves on being independent, and that aging is a part of that. And then we become isolated, and that needs to change. Because I see that even amongst my own friends and myself that we want that freedom of independence and we don't want to engage with others, yet we know that it's so important to be a part of a community and the greater good.
Yes.
And so that's one of the things I've really noticed in America. And the other thing that I'm going to ask you about is, are you familiar with a book which is called Younger Next Year for Women?
No.
Okay, it's two fellows. One is a doctor who he's internal medicine. The other one is his patient. It gives people a concrete piece of information on how to engage in activity. They talk about decay, older people. I mean, it's just a great piece of information that I highly recommend.
Okay.
As possibly a resource for you.
Good, thank you, and for others here as well. And then we tend to think about independence versus dependence. But in fact, all of us are interdependent throughout our lives. We're not really living in the woods in a cabin by ourselves. And even if we were, we would be interdependent with the food sources that we are harvesting one way or another. So yes, it's a false dichotomy that, trying to keep older people independent as long as possible, or the people themselves saying, I want to be independent. I'd like to open us up to the concept of interdependence and accept help as needed and offer help when we can. What else is on people's minds?
You've talked a lot about exercise that I think I might be defining it in a more formal way. And when I think about a lot of older people, exercise for them may be housework. Exercise might be yard work.
Right.
And when you, particularly for older men and women, I think, who have not been socialized to participate in formal exercise in any way, I wonder if you would comment a little bit on how do you talk to people about that part of exercise?
Well, thank you for bringing that up. And it all counts, the people who are deciding, the experts who are deciding what counts as exercise. Gardening counts, walking counts, walking upstairs counts. So I think we need to think more about movement and moving and opportunities to move throughout the day rather than exercise where you have to get dressed in certain clothing and use certain equipment and compete against other people necessarily. Anything that gets us up and around is good. I just realized I didn't move these forward, and I have one final thank you slide up there. This is a meet I competed in with Mom. So there's the two of us, another part of my history of hairdos. Yes.
I just wanted to comment on that because I know I think about that a lot too. And I think it is probably a big issue that some people are more introverted and maybe not as comfortable with the exercise and the social atmosphere, even if it's a really good thing, which I think it is. But I know for myself, like I've been a real video junkie, and just over the years, like put together kind of a collection of what works for me. Mm-hmm. And time-wise, it's practical also. And then when I am out hiking with a group of people or doing an activity or a sport, then I feel like I'm stronger and more prepared. So sometimes I think you can mix the both too.
Right, right. And that's why the best exercise to do is the one that works for you, the one that you will do. And that will change over the course of your lifetime too. You probably won't stick with those exact same tapes forever. You'll move on to other things, even if it's just other tapes. Because we need variety as well. What else? Yes.
I just have a bit of a comment. I'm a family social science major, and I focus on gerontology and aging studies. I've wanted to be an end-of-life advisor for a number of years, and I work with people with Alzheimer's and dementia. I just have a dream someday of establishing an assisted living facility next to, I have a friend who wants to open a daycare center, and we thought, next door, kids and older people can interact. So any of you students who may want to open a fitness center or a rec center, come to our community and do that with us. I just think it would be great.
Yes.
So.
And also pets, it's good to have pets in senior centers. Dogs and other visiting animals can have a wonderful effect on people who don't get out much for one reason or another. And then you were mentioning to me, Laurie, you've got these Silver Foxes teams, 10 basketball teams of women over 40 competing. So do you want to tell people how they can connect with that if they want to join your teams?
Sure, ywca.org.
You're welcome. What else? Other comments? Yes, Mary Jo.
Excuse me. One of my students who came up on stage, I enticed him to come up on stage by telling him that I would give him extra credit. But that's not fair to the other students in the class, so when we were up there, I said, I'm sorry, Quincy, I can't give you extra credit. So he just sat down next to me and he said, okay, but you at least owe me a favor, right, Dr. Cain? To be fair, which is true. So here's the question. Ready? Ready?
Wait a second. How did this turn into I owe him or you a favor? I mean, I'm too smart for this, Mary Jo.
Okay, ready? He
Go
just
ahead.
would like, and this is an educable moment, I think. He would like to know, could you please explain the meaning behind the stronger women get, the more men love football?
Okay, sure. Do you have an hour?
You don't have to answer it. But
No, I'm sure. That was, as you heard, my second book. And it's an analysis of the culture we all live in. And the basic gist of it, the stronger women get, the more men love football, is that as women are gaining strength, not only physical strength, but political strength, economic strength, self-esteem, some men, not all men, but some men are retreating into a world symbolized by football. And football is one of the very few places where it's completely male-dominated, where there are no roles for strong women, where the women are on the sidelines in their cheerleading outfits, jumping up and down and showing off their underwear. That's one way to phrase that. So men who feel threatened by women's growing strength, by the tremendous changes that have taken place in relationships between women and men and women's power over the past 30 or so years, men who feel threatened by that sometimes take special comfort in cheering for and participating in those football games where men are at their most brutal and at their most sexist. We've done research, Mary Jo and I both have done research in locker rooms where men tend to talk about women in very derogatory, very sexist ways. So that's what that book is about. But it's also about strong women. It happened to come out the day O.J. Simpson was arrested for murdering his wife, Anne Ron Goldman. And I had mentioned in the book a history of O.J. Simpson's abuse, domestic violence against Nicole, his wife. And so the book got a huge amount of attention because everybody wanted to talk about O.J. Simpson, and I was ready with my book, but that wasn't exactly what they wanted to hear, that O.J. Simpson was not alone and that there's a pervasive system of sexism in football and in other men's sports. Not every men's sport and not every man. Does that answer the question?
We'll talk about it in class.
Okay, good. It's available from my website. Yes.
I'm curious. We talk a lot about how older people, especially older women, are not in the habit of regular exercise because they just never had access to it or wasn't expected of them. Is there any research being done or any researchers following post-Title IX women to see if the doors that opened for them, are they exercising more regularly than those of us that came before?
The women who are like in their 40s now or something and had Title IX generated opportunities. I don't know. I don't know that. Maybe somebody else knows that. Another question it brings to mind is, what about I guess this is related. What about these women roughly my age? So I did not really benefit from Title IX, but I have been active my whole life. What will my body be able to do at 70 or 80? You know, we don't have, so I guess it's really the same question you're asking. What if women stay in really good shape throughout their lives? How many of these health problems do they have as compared to the women of my mother's generation? But we suspect fewer, unless we blew out our knees playing basketball, and that's another problem. Which does bring to mind, I'm thinking about writing a book about physical intelligence, which is the ability to listen to your own body and pay attention to its subtle signals and then make wise decisions based on that. So if you have any thoughts on that and care to email me or be a part perhaps of a focus group or share some thoughts about how you're listening to your own body on a day-to-day basis and responding to it, I would love to hear those thoughts or involve you in some of that research. Talking about my knees brought it to mind because when I played basketball at Stanford and in the women's pro basketball league here in this country and also overseas, my knees were saying, hey, I hurt, stop it, this is no good for me. And so I taped them and I iced them and I went to all sorts of doctors, but I kept playing basketball, which I don't regret in the course of my life because it was a pretty cool thing to play at Stanford and also in the first women's pro league. I mean, it was impossible to turn down, but athletes are doing that, are destroying their bodies. And I have no cartilage really almost any under my kneecaps, so I can do a lot of things, but none of them involve running. The sitting and floating sports are kind of what I specialize in. So I've really made a study of, what is my body saying, and maybe if, my ankle is sore today or my neck is a little stiff, I shouldn't be doing anything too rigorous, or if I'm hungry, I should be eating, and then when I'm full, I should stop eating. And our bodies are talking to us constantly. Or I work out for 5 days, and then I'm all excited about something on Saturday, but I'm tired. Well, the fatigue is telling me something, so then I usually take that day off. But I don't think we're learning this in health education classes or in physical education classes. I don't think most coaches are talking to their athletes about, how do you feel? Let's respond to what your body's saying. So it's a new subject I'm interested in exploring and would love to involve you in that as well. What else? Should we take another question if there is one? Yes.
I just have a comment. My son and daughter-in-law are in their 30s, and they're very active. The mountain biking, the Birkebeiner, all this. And when my daughter-in-law sent me an email at the bottom, it said, "Be a human doing, not a human being."
Yeah. Cool. A human doing. Okay. Anything else? Well, I think Nicole is going to come back and close us out. Thank you very much. I've really enjoyed it.